people who watch security cameras for a living, what creepy things have you tried to forget? I used to do asset protection for a Walmart in a very heroin-addicted area. The creepiest thing was seeing how fast someone would go from completely normal to absolutely out of it in the span of a year because of the drug. You could build a timeline of their demise through CCTV pictures and video. One man in particular really stood out to me. The first time I apprehended him, he was very polite and intelligent. Just stealing to get his fix. A year later, and the fourth time I caught him, he was basically a shell of a man. He tried running from me and I looked him right in the eyes and said, "I know you, Gary last name, please don't run." The look on his face of someone knowing him who he couldn't even remember will always stay with me. When I worked as a security officer, it was my first week on the job. I watched my boss and another officer try to talk a guy off of the top of our parking structure. Didn't work. Watched him jump off and land next to an employee who was coming in for her shift. Guy hit the ground so hard it exploded the belt right off of his pants. I will never forget watching that. So many of these will give me nightmares, so I'll throw one in the mix that I never want to forget. A year back I was working at a hostel and we have security cameras throughout the building. Watching the footage from the camera in the kitchen. It is about 2 a.m. and a very drunk guest walks in, grabs some snacks, and accidentally drops an empty bottle on the ground. He then proceeds to kick it up into the air, then kick it again in air, where it flies across the entire length of the room perfectly into the recycling bin. In his drunken state he threw up his hands, ran around in a circle clearly in shock at how amazing he is. Then after looking around he noticed there was no one there to see it. After that he looked visibly depressed and stumbled back out of the kitchen. Working in a rehearsal studio for bands, we had camera at the front desk that pointed down the hall with the entrances to all the rooms. One day I'm sitting there minding my own business and noticed there was a girl sitting in the hallway outside one of the studios. She had come in with the band that was practicing and I just assumed she didn't feel like sitting in the loud space with the band. So I got up and went to tell her she was welcome to sit in the lobby where there was a couch and TV. I got around the corner and she wasn't there. I went back the desk and there she was, sitting in the hall waiting outside the room. So I went back out to find her not there again. I assumed she had gone into the room, so I went and knocked and they informed me that the girl had left a while before, just after they had gotten started practicing. So I went back and there she was, still on the camera. It was only then that I realized I had accidentally bumped the freeze frame button for the monitor. Was watching CCTV footage of a parking deck, and on the 9th level terrace this guy sitting in the middle of the deck, banging his head on one of the pillars. All of a sudden the guy just stops, and runs to the edge. Without stopping or jumping, he flings himself over the edge. I immediately called dispatch and told them what had happened. Few days later I was offered counseling for those events. I'm not in security, but I work for a bank and part of my job is checking the cameras in the morning for pings overnight, and then making sure all the pings were just squirrels or leaves, etc. Last week I saw a ping on our back entrance camera, and when I went to watch the video, it was a guy I didn't recognize walking back and forth in front of the door at 3 a.m. for a solid 20 minutes. Like just pacing the whole time, and every couple minutes he'd stop and walk up to the door and stare into the camera. Then he'd go back to pacing. A car eventually went by and that must have set something in him off because he legit ran away and didn't come back. We ended up calling the cops about it, but I still have no idea who he was or what his deal was. One time there was a spider on the lens. It was big. It stayed there for like 3 days. Not necessarily creepy, but I work on security for a popular UK supermarket and came into work one day to find a note asking me to burn an incident off the cameras onto disk. It was something from the car park the previous night, so I figured we'd had a shoplifter in or an accident in the car park, but no, it wasn't anything as pleasant as that. We'd had a situation where a couple older white gentlemen and youngish Asian female had been in store and the night security guy just thought they were acting a bit funny, so he follows them round store on CCTV in store to see if anything went on. Nothing really happens during this time, though the guy seems to become more and more aggravated. They go outside having purchased their shopping to pack it into the car boot, when a clear argument occurs between them. He suddenly turns around, kicks the empty trolley across the car park and then smacks her full force in the face out of seemingly nowhere. She recoils in pain, a bit more shouting takes place, but she seems to dutifully take her seat in the passenger seat despite what just took place. During the process of burning this to disk for the police, since our security guy had called it as an assault, I had to rewatch the moment where he hits her over and over again, but watch helplessly as she seems to calmly get into the car of the man who just assaulted her. Long story short, she was a mail-order bride who was trafficked here, and as well as assault he got done for people trafficking, so a pretty wholesome ending to an otherwise awful story. Mostly lots of sex. I've had to turn on the microphone and tell them to stop it or they'll be thrown out of the college gym. I used to do IT support for a company that had a lot of heavy machinery moving around inside a big warehouse type area. This giant front-end loader would scoop up material and dump it into a hopper. Along the sides of the floor were these huge concrete barriers. I've heard them called Jersey barriers and mafia blocks, but they are about 10 feet tall, and this one guy's life was ended when the front-end loader inadvertently scooped the base of the barrier and landed on one of two guys walking shoulder to shoulder through the plant. I was tasked to review the footage, then make copies, 6 of them, to be exact, and then ensure that the footage worked and was self-executable and able to be run from a USB stick. So I had to watch the footage of this guy get killed over a dozen times. I, too, was offered counseling for just watching the video. I work in a retail store, and for a while I worked security here. Watching the security cameras wasn't technically my job, but we were consistently short-handed in that department and the manager was grooming me for promotion, so I got to fill in and watch the cameras occasionally. One day when we were reviewing footage from overnights, we saw this teenager calmly set down his shopping basket, take off his hat and glasses, and just charge at a wall. Hit it head on. He did this 2 more times. When he was done, his face was a bloody mess, and he put his hat and glasses back on and just left. Weirded me right the hell out. I used to work IT at a university, and last Easter we had a break-in. We found the footage of the guy going in at 2 p.m., leaving at around 3, and not really taking anything. Fast forward to 7 p.m. and the guy comes back in and is walking around the auditorium till 6 a.m. the next morning. In that time he proceeded to strip into his underwear, steal and wear a mask the Japanese exchange students made for the teacher, and smoke a shit ton. He managed to steal 6 full bags of random items. We've dubbed him as the Jack-Off Bandit. Not for a living, but I have had security cameras for the last 10 years at my house. A guy was shot 7 times in front of my house, but I only caught the audio. I've had random people walk around the front of the house looking for anything to steal and actually stealing shit several times. Countless instances where people come up to break into my car until they realize the motion light kicks on and we have cameras. Most of the time people breaking into cars have a large tool bag over their shoulder. It's so amazing about the number of times people come up to my house doing weird shit. If I didn't have the cameras I wouldn't know about hardly any of this shit. One pro tip for anyone installing cameras: make sure you put lots of signs saying that there is video surveillance, otherwise you just end up with a lot of footage of people stealing stuff. I used to work loss prevention for a big box store. We had a lady get arrested for public indecency and I was asked to investigate. I had to follow her backwards from the point of arrest and it was a trip to say the least. She arrived at the store swerving and nearly hitting several cars. She entered the store with 2 young children, both of whom are mentally handicapped. That lady literally dragged those kids around the store, slapping them and tugging at their ears/collars if they didn't obey. At some point she just abandons them in the clothing section, walks through the back doors to the break area, and I'm assuming she thought it was the bathroom because she proceeds to pull down her pants and shits all over the fire exit door. She pulls her pants up without wiping, mind you, and goes back to the floor like nothing happened. Someone saw what she did and followed her. Luckily Terry's an officer in the store at the time and quickly approaches her when the associate tells him what she did. Needless to say, she was definitely high and or drunk and was arrested. The scary part is, she did not mention those kids not one time. It wasn't until I reviewed the tape that I saw they were just still waiting by the shopping cart, completely oblivious and afraid to move. Child services was later called and I still think about those kids often. Breaks my heart to think about the bullshit those kids must still be going through. I was working at pub in Sydney and watching the CCTV when I saw a guy continually cross and uncross his legs while playing a poker/slot machine. After a few minutes he walked to a corner of the room, took a shit and proceeded to go back to playing his machine. Talk about being addicted. Edit. Holy shit, this blew up. To answer some of your questions, this kind of thing is not rare. Mostly it's people pissing themselves. These machines are evil and designed to get people addicted, and that results in some people not being able to pull themselves away, even to use a bathroom. Finally, thank God I'm a manager, but telling someone it was their job sucked. Wasn't a security officer, but I worked at a 24/7 gas station for a while. One night my coworker accidentally killed himself while at work, and I made the mistake of watching the footage. He went to the back of the store with a bag of drugs, probably cocaine, snorted it and started acting funny for about 10 minutes. He then sits in the back office and gets fidgety/thrashing around until finally he just goes limp in the chair. He had died of a heart attack and sat there for 5 hours before anybody came in, thought the absence of an employee was strange, and called the cops. It was really weird seeing people come in and act all pissy for the lack of service. They'd just leave thinking someone was lazy. But nah. Dude was dead. Saw a chicken walk up the side of a tree at 2 a.m.